Take time out to enjoy a more relaxed breakfast with the delightful taste of Twinings English breakfast tea. Twinings gets you back to you.
LBC 97.3. Call Clegg. Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg takes your calls with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. 0845 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC 973. This is Call Clegg on London's biggest conversation. LBC 97.3.
It's 9 o'clock on Thursday the 17th of October, and that means it's time for Call Clegg with me, Nick Clegg, here on LBC 97.3. I'm taking your questions for the next half hour, so if you want to get involved, call on 0845 6060 973 or email at nickclegg@lbc.co.uk, and of course you can watch on lbc.co.uk. Let's go to the first caller then, Sam in Ilford. Hello, Sam.
Yes, good morning, Nick.
Morning.
Could you tell me and the audience whether you're considering sacking Vince Cable over the underpricing of the Royal Mail IPO?
No, I'm certainly not considering doing that. I think Vince is doing a superb job. And I think, look, the price of Royal Mail, I really don't think people can come to a proper judgment on this for several more months. You tend to get these kind of wild ups and downs of the initial share price. We and Vince rather took independent advice. Of course, this is not something just cooked up by politicians, but independent advice from advisors who said, look, this is the range of the share price that you could set as a government, and he actually picked the highest range, so set the highest valuation that had been presented to him in the analysis done for him. And then of course he took these really important steps to make sure that small investors, people just with very small amounts of money who wanted to take up shares in Royal Mail, were given a real leg up in the way that the system was organised.
Sam, what do you want to come back and say?
Pamir Gordon, the stockbrokers and bankers, had already told him on several occasions that he'd actually got the valuation too low, but he still stuck by the 330 valuation, and that low valuation was reflected in the first day of trading when they were up almost 50%.
Yeah. No, the point I'm making, Sam...
Deputy Prime Minister, it's a £1.6 billion difference here, and it's estimated that possibly the taxpayers lost on around 840 million. A lot of it comes back to Vince Cable, but you still say he's the man for the job. He's economic genius.
He's certainly the man for the job, and I think the way he's organised this, such that people who work in Royal Mail get a big chunk of the ownership of the company.
Mr. Clegg,
I understand that. Sam is interested, but the point I was trying to make to Sam is that the 330 price valuation was at the upper range of the estimates that Vince had been independently given. Point one. Point two, I really don't think you can sort of just stick a sort of finger up in the air and say, well, the valuation is this one day and then several £100 million less the next week. Let's look at the overall valuation of the new company over the next several months. I really don't think we can take these sort of snapshot judgments.
Well, it's cost the taxpayers, Nick's just said, £800 million. In fact, it was undervalued to the extent of at least £1.5 billion, which is almost
but Sam, hang on. Sam, look, you obviously disagree with the way Vince has done this, but don't claim that sort of taxpayer has been shortchanged. It's only been shortchanged if we were to discover over a much longer period of time that the valuation that Vince gave was somehow...
There was more in it than 330, wasn't there? Let's be candid. Well, they might have got a little excited, but the markets have spoken, Deputy Prime Minister.
The markets
came in at 330.
The market spoke in those initial days. Markets are very, very... are very volatile things. Markets swing wildly with excessive exuberance one direction, excessive pessimism the other. And what Vince needed to do, and he did it, I think, carefully and meticulously and thoughtfully, as you'd expect from Vince, is he took independent advice and he actually picked the highest valuation that was presented to him.
And just lastly on this, it is worth reminding you, most commentators said that it would open up like this and it was low price, but still Vince Cable got it right, did he?
I think he got it right based on the objective, independent analysis he was given.
All right, Sam, thank you. We move on to other calls. Deputy Prime Minister
Phil in Dartford. Hi, Phil.
Yes, good morning, Nick. Thank you for taking my call. Basically, Nick Ferrari woke David Mellor up very early yesterday morning, and he had a rant about police corruption.
Who did, Nick Ferrari or David Mellor?
David, well, probably a little bit of both.
David
They both
Mellor did,
ranted.
and I served in the police for 30 years and am now retired. I took exception to the imbalance of what David Mellor actually said. But to get to the crux of the matter regarding the Andrew Mitchell Fledgate scenario is why has this government allowed this investigation, both financially and with it being in the media, to run completely out of control? From my perspective, it appears to be an innocuous incident that was Mr. Mitchell apologised for his actions, and that's where it should have stayed. Why has this been allowed to get out of control, Nick?
Well, first thing I say to you, Phil, is I obviously work closely with the police day in, day out, and I'm hugely impressed by the professionalism and integrity of certainly the police officers I come into contact with. So I wasn't up early enough probably to hear David Mellor's early morning rant, but I certainly wouldn't just cast aspersions on everybody working the police, and I think that'd be, of course, that's wrong. The point here is not actually about the incident at the gates of Downing Street. You'll remember this is about the three representatives of the Police Federation who went to see Andrew Mitchell in his constituency office some days afterwards, and then came straight out of that meeting and then claimed that he hadn't provided them with his side of the story when the subsequent revelation that the meeting had been recorded shows that he made every attempt to try and explain what happened, and that he says that he didn't use the pleb word, but that he did, that he did have an outburst and he apologised for it. So I think quite rightly people feel, well, hang on a minute, why did these police officers go into that meeting in his constituency office and then come out and basically, say that he needed to resign and give an account of the meeting, which certainly doesn't seem to conform to what actually happened in the meeting. I think it's perfectly legitimate for Andrew Mitchell to feel pretty sore about that. Now, separately, you're asking, Phil, about the investigation into the actual incident, and that is entirely in the hands of the police. That's nothing to do with the government. The government's not conducting the inquiry into what happened at the gates of Downing Street. And to be honest, that is for the Met to answer about why that is taking quite as long as it appears to be taking.
Phil?
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of what you've said, but obviously, it's got to come to mind that this is an opportunity for members of Parliament to have a snipe back at the police in the event of the investigations for cash for questions, etc. And from my perspective, that's how it appears. It appears that it's another opportunity to embarrass the Met the best way they can.
Well, hang on, Phil.
In a very minor incident.
Let's bring Mr. Clegg in, Phil. Hold on.
No, Phil, I hear what you say. Look, I don't think anybody wants. I'm sure Andrew Mitchell doesn't want this to descend to some sort of long-standing slanging match between politicians and the police. That's a bad state of affairs. But I have to say to you, on the facts of the case as revealed by the report from the Independent Police Complaints Commission, it seems to me pretty clear that those three representatives of the Police Federation who went in to see Andrew Mitchell had every intention not to listen to what he said and every intention to go out and say and to sort of condemn him. And I just don't, I think just basic fairness says that is not right, and that it is correct. The IPCC has revealed that. But
they face disciplinary hearings. Those three.
Well, it's certainly, look, the IPCC report doesn't pull its punches. It says there are serious question marks about their honesty and their integrity. It's up to the chief constables of the respective police forces where they come from.
Well, Theresa May, one of your coalition colleagues, says it's quite wrong if they do not. That is to say, they should.
I must say, I have a lot of sympathy with the idea that when the independent body that is there to look into...
So they should face some form of hearing.
...says that there is questions about the integrity and honesty of police officers in this and indeed in other instances which they look into, of course you should consider disciplinary action.
So they should, yeah. And the thing that David Mellor said, which Phil so annoyed Phil, briefly, was that if they could fit up someone such as Andrew Mitchell, they could fit up anybody. Trust is being eroded. I'm summing it up.
Well, look, it's not good for trust, as I say, between the politicians and the police. If the feeling, and clearly Phil feels this. Phil, are you a serving police officer or a former?
No, sir. I retired 18 months ago, but I served throughout
in the Met,
in the Met, both in uniform and CID, and dealt with some really major incidents. Yeah. And I'm just aghast really that the Home Secretary's even made comment around an innocuous incident really that should have been dealt with.
But Phil, I think that you and I have got to try and strike the right balance. I'm completely with you when I say, look, it cannot be of course it's not a good thing if this becomes some ongoing slanging match between politicians and the police, of course. Secondly, I admire hugely all the work that I see that the Met does. I'm a huge admirer of the Met and indeed of police officers generally. They do fantastic work day in, day out. They put themselves in harm's way to protect the rest of us. However, when something goes wrong, surely, Phil, natural justice dictates that people should be held to account. And something clearly went wrong when these Fed representatives went into Andrew Mitchell's office with what appears to be only one intention in mind, which was to basically go out and then tell the world's press that he needed to resign.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I question that meeting.
That's actually all this is about.
We're going to end on a piece of positive common ground, Phil. I look forward to speaking with you again, Mr. Clegg.
Alison in Boreham Wood. Hello, Alison.
Good morning, Nick.
Morning.
In September, my daughter started at the Elstree University Technical College, which is a feeder school for jobs in the TV and film industry. I'm acutely aware that when she's finished, other than her core GCSEs in English, Maths and the Sciences, she will have very few additional skills should she need to change her career choice due to lack of jobs in the industry. So my question is, with around 300 children leaving each of these specialist technical colleges each year, how can you ensure that there'll be enough jobs on an annual basis available for all these children at the end of their studies?
Well, first, the bad news, Alison, is that neither me nor any politician, nor any government, can sort of create quotas of jobs for if you like, quotas of graduates from technical colleges or indeed from any other college or university. We don't hold the levers of the economy in that way. We don't have a sort of state-planned economy. What we can do, and what we are doing, is doing our bit in government to make sure that the basic kind of fundamentals of the economy are healthy and strong, so that you create a strong economy in which more and more jobs are created. Thankfully, that is now happening. We've got more people now in work than ever before. We've got more. You said it was your daughter, Alison, did you?
Correct.
Yeah, we've got more women in work than ever before. We've now seen 1 million new jobs being created, almost 1.5 million new jobs being created in the private sector alone. And of course, as you know, in your daughter's sector of interest, which is what audiovisual, broadcasting, film and so on, there is an absolute boom going on at the moment, not least because of a lot of the tax incentives and breaks that we've offered to the industry recently. So we do our bit to really support that specific industry, and it's actually going incredibly well, to support the economy as a whole. That's the way that we can provide the opportunities to your daughter and indeed many, many hundreds of thousands of other folk leaving colleges.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alison, thank you for that. Can I feed a couple of emails, texts and tweets into the conversation,
Yes.
Deputy Prime Minister? Sheila in Dartford. My husband and I are having to pay this bedroom tax. We're really struggling. Is it fair? Does the review you've commissioned mean hopefully you're going to change your mind? Please say yes, 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 says Sheila.
Well, Sheila, let me first say what I confirmed in the House of Commons today is something that is not new. It's something that we announced back in March, which is, of course, that a big policy like this, it'd be irresponsible for a government to just sort of say, oh, well, it's happening and not work out or not try and assess how it's actually being implemented on the ground. So we've commissioned a number of independent bodies to provide an ongoing review about exactly how it's unfolding on the ground. The picture is really quite unclear at the moment. I totally accept, as Sheila clearly says, that for some households, for some families, moving from one system to another can be very difficult. That's why for the hard cases, we've actually trebled the amount of hard cash, if you like, that is available to the hard cases, about £150 million now that's available to councils up and down the country, so that where there is a really good reason that households can't move or where they really are caught out by these changes in the rules, that they can be given some extra money from the local council to help them through this. So we talked about this before on this programme. There is a fundamental issue at stake. We've got hundreds of thousands of people living in overcrowded properties. You've got 1.8 million households waiting to get onto the social housing waiting list. You've got, at the same time, about 1 million bedrooms, which in homes where people are receiving housing benefit for those bedrooms, which are not being used. Somehow we have to straighten this out so that people who are living in overcrowded accommodation, where kids don't have a place to do their homework and so on, are in homes where they have enough bedrooms, and the people who have more bedrooms than they need downsize. That's what we're trying to move towards. The difficulty, which I totally accept, of course, is in those areas where sometimes it is just very, very difficult to either make up the money and or where it is difficult to find some place to move to.
Harriet Harman, as we're trading figures, Deputy Prime Minister, Harriet Harman has said, true or not, I don't know, that 96% of these people haven't got smaller properties into which they can move.
Well, that's exactly as it happens. I think, of course, that must be the case in some places.
Well, how can you implement a policy if these poor people can't actually go where you want them to go?
I have a lot of sympathy with for instance, rural communities in Scotland, where if they had to move, they wouldn't just have to move to a sort of a neighbouring village. They have to maybe move tens, even hundreds of miles away. That can't be right. That's why we provided extra money specifically aimed at the councils in those remote rural areas in Scotland and elsewhere, so that people aren't moving hundreds of miles away. I think people would feel that is unfair. But what I would say to Harriet Harman, in fact I did across the floor of the House of Commons earlier this week, is that Labour presided over this change in the rules in all of their years in office for people who receive housing benefit in the private rented sector. So we're extending, if you like, something which they presided over for 13 years when they were in government to people who receive housing benefit in the social rented sector. I accept this is controversial. I accept that we need to help those, provide hard cash for the hard cases, and I certainly accept that we need to keep this under constant review.
But you're still a fan of the idea behind the under. I think
I tell you what. I think the basic rationale, the kind of basic reason, I think most people get, which is that we've got people in overcrowded properties and we've got many other people who are receiving housing benefit for bedrooms they don't need. That cannot be right in the long run. Where I accept legitimate criticism is where that catches people out, or where it's just simply impossible for people to adapt to those new circumstances. That's why we have trebled the amount of money available to local councils to deal with those hard cases.
One last email before we go back to the calls. David in Northumberland, are you pleased that The Guardian is going to be investigated for the betrayal of publishing the spy secrets? I think this is the Edward Snowden file, and isn't there a panel of MPs? Keith Vaz is going to lead an investigation into that.
I don't know what Keith Vaz's select committees do. I mean, last week I said to you, I think anything that helps terrorists and other people to learn more about the kind of technical methods which are used by our agencies to keep us safe and so allow them to do more harm to us, that is a very bad thing. Having said that, I think it is entirely legitimate to ask ourselves whether the oversight arrangements, the way in which we make sure that the agencies who by definition have to work in secret do so in a way which is accountable. Because if you don't have a proper accountability in a way that the public trusts and understands, because quite a lot of the accountability mechanisms we've got at the moment are, how can I put it, very much kind of Westminster Village stuff. The problem then is that people then start losing faith in the whole system. And then, of course, there's the bigger issue, which is a debate which is happening here and on the other side of the Atlantic. I saw that for myself a couple of weeks ago in Washington, which is just how these big, new, powerful technologies are used both by security agencies and indeed by people who wish to do us harm.
More calls, Mr. Clegg.
Chris in Dartford. Hello, Chris.
Good morning to the pair of you.
Hi.
My question is, with the continuing vilification of immigrants within this country and how immigration is putting a huge strain upon a so-called bloated benefit system, do you not think that this is another show of blatant hypocrisy to have government officials and the Mayor of London in China trying to promote business, travelling and education for students to come over here to this country?
Well, look, I certainly agree with you, Chris. I've always been uncomfortable when I've seen people indulge in rhetoric vilifying a whole group of people indiscriminately. And that's why, for instance, one of the first things we did as a coalition government, and I insisted on this, was to end the outrageous practice under the previous Labour government where innocent children were being put behind bars, thousands of them, in prison, behind bars, for immigration purposes. You need an immigration system which is firm but fair. You need an immigration system where people have confidence that we know who's coming into this country and who's going out, which is equally one of the reasons why I've been so vociferous at saying to the Home Office, come on, get on with it, will you, and reinstall these exit checks which were removed by previous governments so that you know not only who's coming into this country, who's going out. We have every right as a country to know who's coming in and who's going out. But at the same time, to make sure, as an open economy, an economy which depends massively on investors coming to invest in this country. The NHS would collapse overnight if we suddenly pulled up the drawbridge and didn't allow anyone to work in this country, to make sure that we are open to those people who want to invest, who want to pay their taxes, who want to play by the rules. That's the balance we're trying to get right in the immigration system, and that's the balance that I will always seek to strike myself.
Coming back to the point that Chris makes, and Chris is still on the line, there is, of course, Deputy Prime Minister, the aspect of the hypocrisy that Chris was exploring, not least, and we looked at this with the visit by Mayor Johnson, indeed by the Chancellor. China, as you may be aware, is responsible for a quarter of the total executions in the world last year. Its human rights record is anything less than satisfactory, yet we seem to be cozying up to them desperately for business. That can't sit well with you.
I certainly don't think what we should be doing is I think we should be hard-headed, open, grown up, but totally frank about our differences, particularly on human rights. It doesn't serve our national long-term interest to somehow brush human rights under the carpet.
Nor does it serve a national long-term interest to invite Chinese businessmen to invest in nuclear energy. Why are we also promoting this when we should be looking at alternatives? This just comes back to
what kind of alternatives, Chris?
Sorry, Mr. Clegg. This comes back to the continuing hypocrisy that we're getting from a coalition government. You yourself have been caught out with not raising. You said that you wouldn't raise university fees, and you have. Yeah. Another case of hypocrisy. Yeah. It is just, for me, a case of politicians and politics becoming more disenfranchised with the average person in the street.
Chris, can I just chip in? I mean, you're dare I say it, bundling quite a lot together, from tuition fees to nuclear power to immigration to foreign investment.
Though.
Well, Chris, I'm sorry. Where you're just flatly wrong is that somehow the issue of human rights in China has any relationship to how we make sure that we have a. Can I just finish, Chris? Has anything to do with how we, as a country, UK PLC, our country, determined by British politicians on behalf of British voters, make sure that we keep the lights on and that we produce energy on a sustainable basis on the future. Now, it so happens to be my view on nuclear energy, since you raised that, is that what we shouldn't do is repeat the mistakes of other countries, and indeed what we've done here in the past, is just throw billions and billions and billions of pounds of your money, of taxpayers' money, subsidising the nuclear industry. But if people want to come here and build safe, sustainable, low-carbon ways of generating energy without dollops of British taxpayers' subsidy, in a way which is entirely regulated by us, where the rules are set by us, not in Beijing, but by us, then I think that's, of course, something we should be open to, because we've got to keep the lights open and and we've got to protect the environment. It's one of the big sort of squares that we need to circle in the coming years.
Just briefly, final point, because I've got so many other guys getting involved. Final point, Chris. Final question. Go on.
Thank you, Mr. Technical, but I just can't see, as an average man that has lost his job recently and not claiming and not getting any benefits, the continual rhetoric from politicians and the blatant hypocrisy. I'm an average man and I can see this. Right. Voting is going to be dropped and it's not going to go well for politicians.
Well, we shall see. We're a little ways off that. Chris, thank you for all your input. Mr. Clegg.
John in Newport. Hello, John.
Hello there, Nick and Mr. Clegg. Question for you with regards to Charles Taylor, the convicted war criminal who is about to serve out his remaining 40-odd years in a jail in the UK. And I doubt whether it was on your watch, but I'd like to know why or who gave the go-ahead for him to serve out the prison sentence here. It was probably a previous government, I would imagine. But more importantly, I think, is a question of he wanted to be transferred to a jail in Rwanda, which was closer for him, for his relatives to visit him in jail. Are we going to be paying for his relatives to come and visit him in jail here?
All right, this is just a reminder, this is, of course, the former president of Liberia, who's been convicted of war crimes, 12 different counts. From memory, the costs are going to be somewhere in the region of approximately, if he comes over because of the high security, there could be anything up to about £100,000 a year for a number of years. And, of course, he's got 65-year term, so it's till the end of his days, Deputy Prime Minister.
John, forgive me, I will genuinely need to get back to you with some of the details. But can I just say, make a wider point, is that making sure that the rule of law reaches, across, how can I put it, without saying too bombs, across sort of space and time, if you sort of mean, so that we make sure that people who abuse human rights are, at the end of the day, held to account. I, for instance, would love to see the International Criminal Court play its role when people are held to account for the atrocities in Syria. That doesn't always come cheap. I mean, I think we must be just upfront about the fact that if we want to make sure that the rule of law is respected, and it's a difficult thing to do, to apply the rule of law to dictators and tyrants who've committed atrocities sometimes many years ago in far-flung countries, I think it's a very good thing and something we should be very proud of, that we, the United Kingdom, constantly step up to the plate to make sure that system of law, that we support things like the International Criminal Court, and yes, that we sometimes foot the bill to make sure that people serve their time.
John, stay on the line. One of our team will take your details and pass them on to the Deputy Prime Minister's office. Now, you won't be surprised, Mr. Clegg, that England's success earlier in the week has prompted some questions and some texts and emails. Nice one here from Graham in Bushy. You may have to consider this, Mr. Clegg. Graham asks, in the unlikely event that England reach the final of the World Cup in Rio in 2014 and they're playing Spain, will your boys side with their mother and support Spain, side with you and support England, or would they be wishy-washy liberals and sit on the fence?
Oof. Calling my children wishy-washy liberals. You haven't met them. You haven't met them. If you think any of my children are wishy-washy. Or indeed the Liberal Democrats are wishy-washy. Look,
it's the World Cup final. Yeah. It's England versus Spain.
I, of course, will do my best to persuade them not to follow Miriam and to instead support the English team. But I can't predict the outcome of that particular contest between Miriam and myself. I'm not sure if I entirely rate my own chances.
When they have played Spain, and we played Spain quite recently, typically who do the boys follow?
I can't remember the last time, so I'm gonna duck this one. But just on the game, I did actually watch the game with my boys, and all of us were united, as was Miriam, in cheering England along. And I thought particularly the second half of the first half was genuinely some of the best play I've seen of the English team in a very long time. So if they carry on playing like they did in some of those purple patches against Poland, I think the email question said it was a remote possibility.
Yeah,
you never know. You never know.
Unlikely event was his words.
You never know.
Perhaps not such a pleasant note has been struck by the front pages of one of the newspapers this morning. A question comes in on this. This is a story. Well, the question is from Richard in Weybridge. Should Roy Hodgson resign over his "feed the monkey" comment to Townsend? This, if you're just joining the programme, it's half-time. England aren't playing that well. He's using a gag which I didn't actually know. It's a NASA joke about the importance of monkeys, and he's referring to a lad on the wing who happens to be mixed race. Deputy Prime Minister, resign is perhaps...
No, I don't. Look, I don't think he should resign, but he should, of course, apologise for any offence that he's caused. It wasn't the greatest choice of words. He has apologised. Look, Roy Hodgson's always struck me as a very kind of decent guy, not as someone who goes out to kind of offend people. And I'm sure, I'm assuming, from what little I know of the guy, he feels mortified, and he's obviously a huge fan of Andros Townsend. He's the one who gave Andros,
by the way.
Yeah, as we all are. But he's the one who gave Andros Townsend the break, so to speak. So look, I think apologies have been issued and apologies have been accepted.
It has.
Wasn't a great choice of words. So I wouldn't know. I don't think he needs to. I don't think he should resign. But obviously you need to choose your words pretty carefully, however much it might derive from a joke that he had in mind.
Back to those calls. I think you've got.
John in Kingston.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Clegg. If I may lead up to my question, the thing is this. If you, I, or Mr. Ferrari, or any person in this country leave their home and have a coffee, they pay for it. We go into a restaurant, we pay for the meal happily. Go to a hotel, the food in the hotel we pay for. My question to you is this. Do you agree that people in hospital who can afford it, should pay for their meals?
That's an interesting one. This is, of course, with ever-growing pressures on the NHS budgets, Deputy Prime Minister, whether a charge should be made for those, not necessarily pensioners or those vulnerable, but whether others should have to pay.
Well, I think I need to look into it. I think there are some cases where some people can sort of pay extra. And of course, you've got cafes and stuff in most often.
But it's while you're receiving treatment, someone typically brings you lunch around.
I think one of the great principles of the NHS is that everybody is treated equally as NHS patients in hospitals. And whilst, of course, we have some charges in the healthcare system, I think we should always tread with care about trying to kind of separate off one patient in one bed in a ward from the patient in the bed right next to them, because I think there's this sense that there is a basic entitlement that everybody enjoys, regardless of the circumstances of where they come from and what their wealth and so on and so forth, is a really important founding principle of the NHS. But it's going to be an ongoing debate, John, this, because we've got an ageing population, medical costs continue to increase. We in this government, as you know, have protected NHS spending, but there's still a lot of pressure on budgets. But I wouldn't immediately resort to saying the way to sort of square that circle is to say that people should pay who can for hospital food. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, if you had to set up all the admin, whether you'd make such great savings even if you did that.
John, thank you. We've got time for one more, Mr. Clegg.
Is it Leyden? Is it Leyden in Kensal Green?
Yes, that's right.
Hello.
Good morning, Mr. Clegg.
Hi.
I wanted to know if, since we're sort of celebrating all religions in this country, if we could have official days that actually sort of allow people who sort of have religious festivals to have a day off from school, because now some schools close for a day, some close half days, and some don't, and it brings a lot of confusion. We've just had Eid. We've been allowed to have the day off as practicing Muslims, and those who were practicing came to school.
Yes, and of course, particularly just to remind the Deputy Prime Minister, Leyden, you're still on the line. There's a school in Birmingham that was under fire because they said they were giving pupils a day for e-learning at home, and in fact it was for Eid. And a school in Blackburn brought the children back 3 days earlier so they could have 3 days off this week for Eid. Mr. Clegg, the suggestion, why don't we just possibly make Eid a school holiday?
Well, this is a really difficult one. But by the way, before we get on to this, Elaine, I think I have a lot of sympathy with parents this morning who are having to, shell out a lot of money for childcare, or maybe not go to work and miss out a day's work because of the strike. And I'm a huge admirer of our teachers, but I really do think putting families and parents at this inconvenience is just not right. It's just not justifiable.
They say they're fighting for their very profession. We took calls in the first hour, Mr. Clegg.
They have concerns about particularly their changes to their pension arrangements. I understand that's difficult. To be honest, millions of people in both the private and public sector are having some quite difficult changes made to their pension arrangements. It's a legitimate debate to be had, how we make sure pensions are financially sustainable for everybody in both the private and the public sector in the long run. I don't think, frankly, hijacking the days of millions of parents up and down the country is the right way of going about it. On this, Leyden, I think schools should be given a bit of discretion and flexibility. There are some school heads that I've spoken to, for instance, who, for non-religious reasons, want to have a bit more discretion about how very long the summer holidays are, for instance. I know some people in the educational sort of world who feel that very long summer holidays can sometimes actually make it more difficult for kids who are struggling in school to get the kind of flying start they need in the autumn term. So I'm actually quite a supporter of a bit more flexibility on what schools can do as far as holidays are concerned. I think it would be best, though, to keep that flexibility kind of within certain limits, because otherwise you just get an absolutely confusing mosaic of different holiday entitlements in different schools, and particularly if you're a parent with kids that go to different schools, that can be incredibly difficult. If you have a half term when you have got one son or one daughter who's at half term for 1 week and another who's got the following week, it can be very difficult for a working parent.
So no specific holiday for Eid, but more flexibility.
I wouldn't start singling out.
All right, Leyden, you had the last call, Deputy Prime Minister. We're there. Thank you very much.
Thank
indeed.
you.
Come and see us again. Same place.
Same place, same time, same format next week. Looking forward to it.
You're listening to LBC 97.3, 9:33, and news is next.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Aziz. Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg has told LBC 97